Random thoughts. In this video, I'm going to read a part of Douglas Jardine's book, The Mad Mullah of Somaliland. Now, this is a book that was published in early 1920s, and Douglas Jardine was a colonial administrator. He was a senior colonial administrator in what was known as British Somaliland from 1916 to 1921. Now, this book covers mostly the Dervish Wars. These are wars that were fought by Mohammed Abdullah Hassan against the British from 1899 to early 1920s. Now, in this part, I picked a part where he mentions very interesting or some interesting incidences that happened. Now, this is 1913, and the British are considering reoccupying Somaliland, the interior. At some point, they had left, they had evacuated, but now they are planning to go back. And some things are happening that seems to me to be kind of like it's not what it seems to be. It seems like there was some propaganda going on. The British really wanted to reoccupy the land, but they needed to have a justification or excuses. And there is this incident that happened where some people came to Berbera. Seems like most likely it was at night, and they did some shooting towards the city, and then they left. And that, of course, created a lot of panic in the city because people feared that the dervishes were coming and they were going to, of course, raid the city. And of course, that's one of the things that informed the British deciding to reoccupy the interior of Somaliland. Now, I'm going to read this part where he mentions or he talks about some of those things or some of the things that happened around that incident of some people shooting at the city. And this is what Jardine says. It may not be without interest to record here that the self same Wala appeared in Berbera one evening some years later with precisely the same news. Now, Wala, according to my understanding, is a villager or someone who came from the village. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's the meaning that Jardine assigns to this word. And he said that during the first shooting to the city of Berbera, there is somebody who came from the villages around, I guess, and he came and he reported that the dervishes were coming. And the British did not listen to him. They thought that it was just some guy making some random statements. And actually, those shootings happened. Now, a second time, this same guy comes and he comes to report that actually the dervishes were again coming. But this time is a little bit different, and it's kind of like funny how the whole thing turns out. And Jardine continues to say, the dervishes, he declared, were again advancing to the town. He was promptly given the food and money which he sought, but by the time his intelligence had proved to be utterly without foundation, he had left the town and had disappeared into the bush. So turns out this guy was lying, and he came, he brought this news, and then he asked for food. He's given food. He's given, looks like he was given some money, and he disappears. But turns out he had just created the entire story. There was nothing like the dervishes coming to the town. And he continued to say, otherwise, the order of his previous experience might well have been reversed. So then he continues to say that Jardine, but the misjudged Kariawala was not by any means the only contributor to the lighter side of the attack on Berbera. So he said there was also other stories that are kind of like funny about that attack on Berbera. There was also the imperturbed officer who, despite the nocturnal confusion, insisted on shaving and dragging on his field shoes before starting to deal with the marauders, who, needless to say, had decamped long before this ill-timed act of detivation had been completed. So there is also this guy who, there is chaos, there is confusion all over the place, but this guy decides that he's going to make himself look good, look okay, before he can go out and face the dervishes, which is very, very interesting. But there is, when you read these parts and you come to the conclusion that there was something else that was happening. And my conclusion is that most likely some of these activities were arranged by the British to get justification to reoccupy the interior. And Jardine seems to suggest so. Let's read this part. It says, but the episode had not been half Gilbertian enough for those who bandy savage stories in clubland. According to this school of thought, the whole incident had been organized by the local administration, who had collected together 40 friendly tribesmen to fire a few shots into the capital by night in order to impress upon the home government the desirability of abandoning their policy of coastal concentration. So it kind of like says that there are people around who will say that actually the shooting towards the city of Berbera was actually organized by the local administration with the goal of making the home government believe that actually Berbera was in danger of being attacked by Mohammed Abdul Hassan and the dervishes, and therefore changed the policy because the home government had decided that they were not going to occupy the interior. In fact, they had said that the entire army to leave the interior, and the army in Somaliland should not engage the dervishes. So there were these rumors that actually what happened is that this shooting into Berbera was organized by most likely the British, and of course Jardine implies, but he denies that that's what happened. He basically tries to make it seem like the people who are passing on these stories, these were just baseless rumors. This is what he says. The burned villages and mutilated corpses on the Berbera Las Dure road were, of course, ignored by the concorders of this diverting theory. So, during the shooting that happened towards Berbera, there were stories that actually there were people who were killed by the dervishes who left or going away after shooting into the city. Now, here is something that is can be very difficult. These are just news that came. It's possible that actually there was no one who was hurt. It's possible. I'm not saying there were not, but I'm saying it's possible. So Jardine says that these people who are passing these stories of the British organizing for some people to come and shoot towards Berbera so that it is a justification or to make the home government change its policy, he says that they are trying to, or they are ignoring that very important and tangible evidence, even though, of course, it's still a news that came. The people reading the book will never know for sure that there were bodies. We don't know. It's him who's telling us that there were. Then he continues, but there has never been anything so Machiavellian attributed to our rulers in Somaliland that some could not be found to subscribe to it. So he says some of these stories that are told about the British in Somaliland and what they've done, and them playing these power games, the Machiavellian approach to things, he's just telling us that actually they don't do anything of that kind. It's just people who create stories to and try to make it sound that they do that, but they don't. But think about it carefully. There is no way that the British were not engaging in propaganda. Like that is saying like they were not doing what they're supposed to do. If you say they were not engaging in any propaganda, they must have been. Any power even today has to engage in propaganda, whether big power, small power. Propaganda is a critical component of war and conflict and fights and things like that, especially when it comes to conflicts between commonwealths and different forces, political forces and military forces. So there's no way he's trying to make it sound like the British were never engaged in any Machiavellian activities in Somaliland. Nobody can argue that today. Even him, I don't think he can make that. Of course, he might make it towards people he thinks cannot believe or can believe him, but there's no way anybody can actually believe that. Those are my random thoughts.